We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Nun Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 150b. The Gemara here continues. Amar Lei Rav Ashi responds to Ravina. This is in reference to the Mishnah in Meseches Peah. The Mishnah in Meseches Peah is being brought as a proof that an Eved is considered like metaltal and an Eved is considered like movable property, because the Mishnah in Peah says that if a person writes over all of his property to his Eved, except he retains for himself some metaltalin, so we say that he's not freeing the Eved, because it could be the metaltalin actually is the Eved. And so therefore it seems to be a proof that, again, it seems to be the Eved is considered like metaltalin. So he responded, it's not a proof, because anon mishum delav krosgita masninan la. We understand this Mishnah that the explanation is that it's not considered a complete severance, it's not considered completely cutting off himself from his Eved, and you need it to be krosgita, you need to completely sever the relationship with the Eved in order for the Eved to go free. And the Rashbam explains, again, Rav Ashi says to Ravina, Da'anon mishum delav krosgita masninala. We understand that it's not krosgita, that's why it does not work over there. Eved gomer lo la meisha, we learn out Eved from Isha, from the word law. D'ba'inon get krisis, it needs to be get krisis, you need to totally sever the relationship. V'keven diyesh lebal ha'eved zechus b'shtar shekoseb bo sheshayar karko metaltal liatzmo. If the owner, if he has some kind of a zechus, some kind of an ownership, so to speak, in the shtar, because he's leaving for himself land and metaltalin, so lo lo hashtar lagamri, he's not giving the shtar over to the Eved totally. Shagam zechus ha'adam kosebo, because there is some ownership, some rights of the master written into the shtar. Hilkach lo karina be get krisus, therefore it's not considered to be get krisus. And the Rashbam continues, v'gabe get amay choshvin afilu metaltalin shir eitzel Eved. Okay, so in this situation, why is it that even movable objects are considered a shir? Because that seemed to be the whole proof that even metaltalin, Eved is in the category of metaltalin. And the Rashbam explains, hainu taima mishum de krisus gomer be'inon. The reason is, when it comes to setting a slave free, it needs to be krisus gomer. You have to totally sever the relationship. V'kevan shezeh shayar metaltalin, and since this person left for himself movable objects, man lei malon, who will say to us, who can tell us to lohe bedaito l'shayar ha'eved b'chlal metaltalin? Maybe he's also leaving for himself the Eved included in those metaltalin. Acharei shelo piresh mahen ha'metaltalin sheshayar, since he didn't really explain which metaltalin he was leaving off. V'yafagav de beduchta achrina avda k'mekarkoi dami. And the point is, even though in other contexts an Eved might be considered like land, miu gave krisus lav krisus, but when it comes to severing the relationship, to setting the Eved free, it's not considered enough to set the Eved free. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman. Rava says that Rav Nachman says, Chamisha, there are 5 cases, ad sheyichtavu kol nechseim, where the person has to write over all of the property, and then the halacha is different from a situation where he writes over only some of the property. V'elu and here are the 5 cases. They are as follows: Shchimera, somebody on his deathbed; Avdo, his slave; Ishto, his wife; Ubanav, his children; and Mavareches means a woman who's trying to shelter her property from her husband. And the Rashbam explains, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Rava says that Rav Nachman says there are 5 cases, means to say nosnei matanahin, 5 different individuals or cases where a person is giving a gift. She'ein dinan cholak mi nosnei mixas ad sheyichtavu kol nechseim, where we're going to say that the halacha is not distinct from giving part of the property unless you write over all of the property. V'yaz dinan cholak, only if all of the property is written over do we say that the halacha changes mi mishayir ksas mimenu, from a case where the person leaves off part of it. Ukegon shelo shayru klum afilu b'metaltalin. Again, the case has to be where he leaves off nothing, even movable objects. Kinemasik b'seifel levar miksu basisha b'mekarkoi haveshir v'lo metaltali. That's where the exception, as we'll say at the end, that's where the exception of ksu basisha, that karka is considered a shir, not metaltalin. But otherwise, again, anything is going to be considered a shiur. Even metaltalin will be considered a shiur. And the Gemara now continues and explains the 5 cases. Shchimera, what's the case of one on his deathbed? Tetanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Shchimera shekasav kol nechasav la'acherim. If a Shchimera writes over all of his property to others, v'shayir karka kolshu, but if he leaves some land, he doesn't give away some of the land, matanaso kayemis. So then we say that the gift is considered to be an effective gift. Even if the Shchimera recovers, we still say that the gift is effective. But lo shayir karka kolshu, but let's say he doesn't leave any land, he's giving everything away. So then we say, ein matanaso kayemis, then we say his gift is not considered effective. If he recovers, the gift is not effective, because we assume that he was only giving it under the assumption that he was was going to die. So there you see an example, again, where there's a distinction between leaving out some of the gift, and giving a full gift. And the Gemara continues, Avdo, what's the case of his slave? The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, we quoted this above, Hakosev kol nechasav liavdo, if somebody writes over all of his property to his eved, to his slave, Yatza ben chorin, so then we say that the slave goes free. But again, Shayar karka kolshu, if he leaves behind any amount of land, so lo Yatza ben chorin. So in that case, he does not go free, because we say, maybe it's the eved really that he's leaving off. And the Gemara continues, Ishta, what about the case of his wife? What case is that? Yamar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel. Because Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, Hakosev kol nechasav liishto, if somebody writes over all of his property to his wife, lo asa ela apetropa, he's really making her just a caretaker, so that again applies specifically by all of the property. And Bonav, what's the case of his sons? The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Hakosev kol nechasav levanov. Let's say a person writes over all of his property to his sons, v'chasav liishto karka kolshu, and he writes over to his wife some amount of karka, so then we say avda ksuba, so then we say she loses out her ksuba. And again, in this case, this is the case that Rashbam was pointing out, that only this case of the 5 is specifically land. It does not apply to metaltalin. And the Gemara continues, mevareches, what's the case of mevareches? That's a woman who shelters property from her husband. Diyamar Mar, because the master said, mevareches tzricha shetichtov kol nechaseha. When it comes to a mevareches, let's say she's trying to shelter her property from her husband, so she's giving it over to a third party, she has to write over all of the property. So again, you see this halacha has to be all of the property. And the Gemara notes what the Rashbam just said, Uvakulo. Now in all of these cases, metaltali have a shear. Let's say the person leaves off movable objects, that's also considered to be something significant that was left off. Levar miksuba, that's with the exception of the case of the ksuba. When you're talking about a situation of a ksuba that's supposed to be collected from land, because it's only by land that the Rabbanan made the takana. Metaltali lo tikun Rabbanan. They didn't make that takana with regards to movable objects. And the Gemara continues, Amemar says, Metaltali dechsivi b'ksuba, when you're talking about movable objects that are written into the ksuba, that she is supposed to collect those specific movable objects, ve'isnu b'inayu, and those movable objects are still around, they're able to be collected. So let's say in that situation, again, the person writes over all of his property to his sons, but he gives over to his wife that specific metaltalin, so have a shear, that would be considered a shear, because it is something that is directly collected from the ksuba, and in that case we would say that she does lose out on a ksuba by collecting that specific metaltalin. And the Gemara continues, Amar nichsai leplanya, let's say a person says that my property is going to so-and-so. So the Gemara's question is, what is included in the term nichsai? What's considered to be included in the term property? And the Gemara says, Avda ikri nichsai, a slave is considered to be property. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Hakosev kol nechasav liavdo yatza ben chorin. If a person writes over all of his property to a slave, the slave goes free. You see that the slave is included in nichsei. And the Gemara continues, Ara ikra nichsei. Land also is ikri nichsei, that's also called property. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, nechasim sheyesh lan achrayis, if you have property that has a lien that refers to land, niknin bekesef uvishtar v'chazaka, that can be acquired with money and with a document and with chazaka. You see that land is called nechasim. And the Gemara says, galima ikri nichsei, a cloak also, a garment, those types of objects are considered nechasim, that's property. The Tanan, as the Mishnah says, v'she'ein lohen achrayis ein niknin ela b'mashicha, it says that nechasim, property that have no lien, and we say that the kinyan is made through Mashicha, so you see again that those kind of objects are called nechasim. And the Gemara continues, Zuzei ikri nechsei, that money also is called property. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, V'she'ein lahen achrayis niknin im nechasim sheyesh lan achrayis, you have property with no lien that's acquired together with property that has a lien, B'kesef uv'shtaro v'chazak, with money and with document and with chazaka. And how do you know that that part of the Mishnah is even talking about making a kinyan on coins? You know that from the following story. Ki hadar Babba, because there was an incident with Rav Papa, Havale Tracer Alfei Zuzei Bechozoi. He had 12,000 zuz that were deposited in a location called Bechozoi. Achninu Nehile Rav Shmuel Baracha Agav Asifa Debeise. So he was able to transfer it over. He transferred those coins to Rav Shmuel Baracha using exactly this kinyan agav, using the property at the entrance of his house. He gave that property to Rav Shmuel Baracha, and through that kinyan that he made on the land, it's called the kinyan agav. That's what we're talking about in the Mishnah we just quoted above. He made a kinyan on the coins as well. well. And Kiyasa, so when he came, Nafak liape atavach, when he came with the money, he was able to get the money for him. He went out to greet him until Tavach. And so you see from that story that the money was acquired through Kinyan Agav. Money is also considered to be Nechasim. And the Gemara continues, Shtara Ikri Nechse, also documents are called property. Diyama Rabba Bar Yitzchak, because Rabba Bar Yitzchak said, Shnei Shtaros Hein, there are two documents, meaning two halachas that are relevant to documents. Amar Zechu Besada Zel Ploni V'chisvu Lo Es Hashtar. Let's say the person says, take ownership of this field for so-and-so and write from the shtar, Choser B'shtar Ve'eno Choser B'sada. So then you can retract in terms of the document, but you can't retract in terms of the field. But if he says it's on condition that you write the shtar, so then choser bein b'shtar bein b'sada. So then the person can retract both by the shtar and by the field. And the Rashbam explains, Agav Asifa Debesa, again, he transferred the coins to him through the threshold, through a Kinyan Agav of the threshold of his house. Shehikna lo besudar, he did a Kinyan Sudar, he made a Kinyan with a scarf. Karka Knisas Beso, that's the land that's at the entrance of the house, that's the threshold of the house. Vagavo Hikna lo Hamos, and through that, he transferred over to him the money, Betoras Harsha HaMufureshes, but Baba Kama through Harsha, that's all explained in Baba Kama. Inami, or you can say, Halach V'hichzik HaKarka, maybe it wasn't a Kinyan Sudar, maybe he actually went and made a Kinyan Chazak on the land, and then he transferred over to him. He gave him the money wherever that was. And again, we see that Kinyan worked. And the Rashbam continues, the Gemara brought the statement of Rabba Bar Yitzchak with regards to a shtar. Let's say a person says, Zachu b'sadazu, if he says, be zocha in this field for so-and-so, hikna lehen b'sudar l'tzorech ploni, he makes a kinyan sudar with them for the purpose of ploni, for the purpose of another individual. So then choser b'shtar, let's say he also says that you should write up a shtar for the recipient, he can retract the shtar. Miyipoy koach the shtar, in other words, the point was he wanted to give the recipient greater strength in terms of receiving the gift. He can be choser from that and say, forget the shtar. Yachol achzer, but he's able to retract from that. Kozman shelo nimser hashtar lo, so ploni, as long as the shtar hasn't actually been given to that person. V'yeino choser b'sada, but he's not able to retract in terms of the gift of the field. Acharei shekvar zochu b'kinyan b'chazak, if they already made a kinyan or some kind of chazak in the field for the recipient, so he already has the field, he can't retract. B'zachin ladam shelo b'fanav, there's a halach of zachin ladam shelo b'fanav, even though the person is not present, he can take ownership. And the Gemara continues with regards to shtar. Rav Chia bar Avin amar Rav Huna. Rav Chia bar Avin says that Rav Huna says shlosha shtar, saying there are actually three cases of shtar, because again Rabba Bar Yitzchak quoted two cases: the case of zachu b'sada zel ploni v'chisvu lo es hashtar, and then the case of almanas shetichtavu lo es hashtar, and the condition that the shtar is written, where you can retract both by the shtar and the field. And Rav Chia bar Avin amar Rav Huna is adding a third case. There are three cases shlosha shtar, saying there are three cases of shtar. Trei hani damar, two that we just quoted above, and idach in the third one. The other one is as follows: Im kadam mocher v'chasav es hashtar. Let's say a seller went ahead and wrote a shtar early, ka'osa shashaninu, like that which we learned in the Mishnah. And the Rashbam explains shlosha in yonei shtaros, saying there are three halachas with regards to shtaros. V'lo balach lokel elahos. If he's not trying to argue, he's adding on a third. Im kadam mocher v'chasav shtar mechira lios mizumin lelokeach kol shasha yirtza lemocher lesadeo. The case over here is, let's say a seller goes ahead and writes a shtar that it should be ready for the buyer whenever the sale is ready to be made. Lo yehei ikov b'ma'osa b'shvil ksivas hashtar. He doesn't want things to be held up to write the shtar. And that's why he wrote it early, which he can do like the Mishnah teaches. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Nun Aleph Amid Aleph.